a couple of discussion on HTML, CSS, and we also we got to understand our knowledge gap, right? So that's what we're going to be doing front end generally. Right. So first and foremost, let me share. This is like the roadmap of what we're going to be doing going forward. Right. So look at the days. Right. So the days we're going to be meeting are every Thursday virtually from 7:30 to 8:30, and then Saturday bi-weekly. Right. We're going to meet in on site. Yes. So just to clarify that. Also, for this class, you are expected to have like a basic knowledge of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Let me skip the others. Right. So, for the first week now, which was last week and this week, we're just going to be recapping on HTML and CSS basically, and subsequently, we're just going to be doing JavaScript, React, and what have you. Now, and then towards the final week, so we're going to be building like a real project basically. So, but when I say we're going to be doing JavaScript subsequently, does not mean we're still going to forget about HTML and CSS, because you can't totally do away with HTML and CSS talking about front-end web development. Right. So, that being said, let me go back to my slide. Now, front-end web development. A brief introduction of myself. My name is Ojonugwa Justice Alikali. I'm sure it's a name you guys are not really familiar with, right? Yeah, but you can call me OJ, like I introduced on the group. Yes, I am a full stack and a mobile developer. Yes, and currently I'm building a product named Preston. We are like a portfolio company under ALX Venture. So yes, great. So from Saturday we're talking about HTML, right? And this is like me doing a recap of what we did on Saturday before we go into today's conversation. And like I said, today is going to be practical because very soon I'll be opening my text editor, showing us a couple of things, getting interaction from each and every one of us, right? And hopefully I get to carry everybody along, right? For those who are advanced, for those who are just starting out, but at least I've done one or two things on front-end web development. So yes, on Saturday we're talking about HTML. We got various definitions of HTML. A debate was almost starting out. Somebody said HTML was a programming language, but on the light note, it was. So we talked about how is HTML a programming language or not? So, yes, if you notice from this picture, it's a picture of a man laying bricks generally. So this is what I like to liken HTML to. HTML is like is a building block of elements, right? It gives structure to the web page. It tells the browser how to display the content, right? There are a lot of things HTML can achieve. Even people that are like struggling with, they have one or two disability, right? HTML have something for them. You can't see properly, right? There's what we call accessibility, right? Where maybe you're using things like screen reader to navigate a web page or so, right? And that is why you as the developer has to have a proper knowledge of HTML so that you can be able to develop for those who have those disabilities too, right? On Saturday also I talked about I think I was talking about Lego blocks, and somebody was asking me what Lego is. So let's quickly look at what Lego is. A Lego is just like a building block, right, of toys basically. So something like this, right? So this is what a Lego is. Right, for the person asking me, so I'm sure you've seen this before. So also HTML can be likened to a Lego block, right? You can use it to achieve a lot of things, right? Depends on how creative you are. Okay, so back to HTML. Yes, that being said about HTML, HTML has a basic structure. I know some of us know this already, right? It has a simple structure, and I like to liken that structure to like a boilerplate, right? Now, what is a boilerplate? You're going to be hearing a lot of these terms when you're watching tutorials and maybe you're working with a team. Boilerplate is just like saying oh, these things are going to be used like often and often and often, so it becomes standardized, right? So it's going to be repeated codes wherever you are. You're trying to spin up a HTML code document in the US, you're going to still be using the same structure. You're trying to spin up anywhere you are in Europe, anything is going to be the same structure, and the structure is quite simple. We have our doc type, then which is enclosed. We have other things enclosed inside the HTML tag. I'm going to going deeper into that, right? I know most of us know this here, but this is just like a recap, taking it from you to you, and then it's comprising of two sections: the head section and the body section. That being said, let me just move on so that we don't dwell much on that. So that we'll go into what today really entails. Right. So a quick one. So the building block, this block I was referring to, right, here in this slide, is we refer to them as HTML elements, right? Now this element comes in form of a tag. So take note of this particular tag, right? This particular tag here, the content goes inside and the closing tag. Now I'm sure we've seen these things countless of time. H1, paragraph. Now this is the opening tag and this is the closing tag. If you notice, to the H has two symbols, less than sign, greater than sign, and then the closing tag has the differentiating factor between the opening tag and the closing tag is this / basically. So yeah, that's HTML element. So a lot of HTML elements are just going to be written in this form, basically. So yes, that being said, what is important? What do we need to recap on, remember on HTML? Those important things we need to know, right? I'm not here to teach us like the scratch basic of HTML. Oh, this is the ABC of HTML. I'm only just going to be touching the important things, right? And then if you need to learn more, I'll give you resources. You could also send your feedback to me personally or on the group chat, and then we get to talk about it. Or you can ask your question and I'll try as much as possible to answer if I have the answer. If I don't, I go do my research too. And feel free to also correct me when you think I have probably deviated or I don't have the up-to-date information about it. Like, everybody is learning basically. So yes, the next one, we're looking at HTML block elements versus inline elements. Now, before I talk about block elements versus inline elements, there's something we need to know. This my HTML resource and the CSS resource is solely going to be from W3 Schools. I don't know how many of us has Mosney used W3 Schools before. Please, you could just indicate. Yes, exactly. Okay, great. So, yeah, awesome. So W3 Schools is should I say, the best written, let me say, documentation or written tutorial for HTML and CSS, in my opinion, for beginners actually, right? In the sense that they try to make it as clear as possible, not too much story, and then you can also try it out yourself. Now, when you now start advancing, you now start taking a look at things like MDN. I don't know if anybody knows about MDN. Mozilla Developer Network, right? So that's alone. If I open a sample now, it's not so beginner friendly, but it gives you the total detail of a particular, should I say, element or something you're trying to use, right? So as much as W3 Schools is good, W3 Schools used to not take away some of the details you need to know. So when you're entering a more advanced form, you will now start checking out things like MDN and the likes of them, right? And to be honest, when I started out as a web developer, I used to think, tutorials on web on YouTube are the total thing. But sometimes when you start going deeper and start seeing some tutorials, you'll be like, oh, okay. Yes, there are some YouTubers that almost their content is like premium basically. When we get to React, there's a YouTube channel resource I'll be sharing with us, and that guy is like, I think he really touched it deep on React, right? So even compared to some premium tutorials, but there are still some tutorials that are actually more robust, right? So that being said, HTML block versus inline elements. This knowledge is very important because HTML generally is like a building block, right? So it's just like saying you now you're like the engineer. Well, we are called engineers, right? And when you start working with a team, you'll be presented with designs to work with. So it's your job as the developer to actually bring that design in clear pictures. Now, I know some people that say, "Oh, I finished HTML, I finished CSS. I There's really nothing to learn about that again. It's just JavaScript that's my problem now." To be honest, right, your JavaScript knowledge should be top notch. Right, there's a team you will join, or there are some interviews you will join, and then they will rate you low because of your ability to implement the design given to you. Right, so that's why you need to know HTML and CSS very well. So that being said, I have a picture, two pictures, right? Now, HTML has a default, every element has a default display style. Please mind you, for those who don't understand what a display property is, right? So when we get to CSS, you connect the dots properly. Alright, so the two common display are block and inline elements. Now, what does this mean? I use the car to represent. We have a parking space. Now, notice that this horizontal place is like a parking space. This is a parking space. Right. It's also a similar parking space. Now, take for instance, now you have 3 Mikras. For those staying, okay, yes, we're all in Ibadan, so I can use Mikra. Yes. We have 3 Mikras, or 3 Porsche, or 3 B2, or 3 Mini Coopers. I'm just talking about cars that are small in shape, right? Or even 3 regular Toyota Camry or Toyota Corolla. They could perfectly fit into that spot, this particular spot, until maybe there's no space available again. Then you have to park in the next space. Now, this is how some elements are, right? Those elements, they call them inline elements because when you use them, right, they stay on the same line with the previous element. Trust me, after this slide now, I'll launch in my VS Code, and then I'll give us examples of how that works. So you can perfectly park those cars on the same space. But now, somebody who has a limo comes to that same spot, then he occupies all the space, all the horizontal space available in that spot. And then the next person has to come to the next one. So they are like, should I say, they are like elements that are block level. They are elements that are inline level, right, in terms of their display property. Okay, like I said, this is just me giving you the bigger picture, right? For those that don't know, you would connect the dots later, right? So yes, the block level element always starts on a new line, and the browser automatically adds like some space before and after this element. I don't want to say too much story. I want to launch my VS Code at this point, but before then, let's just take a look at a material on that on W3 Schools. So this is how me as a developer now, the way I'm going to be teaching is the way I take approach in writing my codes, right? So to be honest, this knowledge and this information are a lot, right? So I'm of the school of thought, or I have the opinion that you just need to understand the basics and understand the principles, right? That is why documentations are there. So I don't need to start cramming a lot of things. With experience, you get to learn other things, right? But just understand, how does this work? How can I use it? What are the options available to me? Right? And then you can refer to their documentations, and that's why they are called documentations. So HTML, inline, and block elements. Now, if you notice, this is how W3 schools put it, inline and block elements. So yes, now this is a representation of two block level paragraph. So when you write it, it just takes up that whole space on the screen, takes up that whole horizontal space on the screen, right? And two most common example is the paragraph and the div. Please, in case you have a question at any point, you could just unmute yourself and say, excuse me, please, I have a question, and I could take your question. Thank you. So they also listed other types of block elements, right? We have the HR, it will take all that space, the session, and what have you. And then inline elements, a very famous inline element is the span block, right? So it's a span element. So span is inline in the sense that it can stay on the same line with other inline elements, right? Or you could even use it inside inside other block elements, and it will accommodate itself with the previous contents. I think I'm speaking a lot of English, right? So yes, let's start with like creating a new project for this class, right? And I think from there we'll just start. Okay, sorry, let me create a new project. Should I say a new project or a new file? What do I even need to do? Coming. So yes, let's just start with I'm coming, please. I just want to. Well, I preferred not to do all these things before coming so that we would see how it works. And pardon me, please. I know I'm using a different interface compared to what other people are used to. Should I say GDG Frontend class? Right. So it works the same way if you're using a Windows, right? I'm creating a folder and I would open that folder on my VS Code, so that we can create different HTML documents in it. Right. So yes, this is VS Code. VS Code is used for writing your codes, right? For development generally is one of the most used, should I say, text editor developers use right now because it has a lot of good functionalities, right? So subsequently, when I'm doing some things, you could ask question, oh, how did you get to do about that thing now? And then it has what we call extensions. These extensions are just other tools that will help your code look better or help you do some things in a better way, right? So I'm inside this GDG frontend class, right? The folder. This view here is just the view to view your files inside the folder. So I'll go ahead and create a new file, right? A new file like this, and then I'll call it, let me just say index.html, right? So this is a blank HTML page inside this GDG frontend class. Now, this HTML page, if you notice, as I created it, it was giving me HTML5 icon here. That's because I have an extension that actually helps me view my file. Well, if I'm creating a CSS file, and maybe I say style.css, it gives me HTML3. If I'm creating a JavaScript file, and I say script.js, same thing too. So that's why VS Code is quite a nice go-to text editor, right? So let me just delete the other ones because we're just going to be working on the HTML file. All right, so from the beginning, recap when I say HTML has a structure for my slide. All right, so this is the place I said HTML has a structure, a simple structure. Now, the structure starts with doc type, and there's an interpretation to this doc type, which is what do I even say? HTML5. There's a difference between HTML5 and HTML4. I don't want to go much into that, right? Please just be taking note of those things you think you don't understand, right? You could actually ask me directly, and then I'll explain to you. But I feel it's a basic terminology for basic HTML knowledge, right? So HTML5. Now, for me to bring up that structure, all I just need to do is type HTML and select HTML5, right? So there's a functionality called emit abbreviation. It just brings up code snippets for you. Now, before this, you have to install the extension, but I think since like 2 or 4 years ago, they integrated emit into what's the name, VS Code, so you can easily just do some things up, and then it will bring up some things for you. Now, notice how it brings out my code, the same structure, right? The head section and the body section. All right, so that being said, this HTML index is up and my body section too is up. Now, whatever we're going to do, most of the things we're going to be doing is inside this body tag. Now, I wanted to demonstrate the div tag and the inline element and block element. Now, this is a sample div, basically. So, this is a sample div. I'm using a div element, right? So, it's just to showcase how this guy works. So, if I open this on a browser, now there's no styling, it's just pure HTML, so it's going to be very small, but I'll zoom in for us to see. Right, so this is it. This is a sample div. Now let me copy this guy and make another one. This is another a second, should I say second sample div, right? Now notice, because this guy is a block element, it didn't come to join it by the side, right? All it just did is it came to the next available line because they are block. Now, the same thing goes for a paragraph, right? If I decide to use a P, if you notice, so this is not no longer a div, this is a paragraph. And then, please pardon the spelling, I just want to demo that this works. Right. But for things like span, if I decide to use a span element here, right? Sorry, this inline and stuff is pretty much important. That's why I'm just taking it up. Right. So if you notice, this is a sample div, this is a second sample paragraph. Now both of them are span. If you notice, it tries to put two of them together on the same line, right? And then that way, if the line is no longer available to accommodate it, it now breaks into the new line. So what I'm saying in essence is understand the elements that are block element and inline element. Now, as you progress forward, you will understand how to use CSS to actually change this element. Maybe you want to make a span element a span element from inline to block, and then from same goes for what was I'm going to say again, for div you want to turn it to inline, but I don't think you see a reason to do that. I have not, but yes, that works. All right, so talking about inline and block elements, before I move on, I don't know if anybody has a question, so that I don't be the only one talking. Very soon, I'll have questions for us. So, yes, if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hands up. Hello? Okay. Okay, great. So, I don't think anybody has a question at this point. Now, let's move on. Right. The last time I talked about HTML semantics. Right. So, HTML semantics are just basically HTML elements with meaning, right? So this, instead of using just div or span, you could use other elements like section, articles, and what have you, right? Now, this particular this particular element, it just gives meaning to whatever you are doing on your browser, basically. So it helps for search engine optimization, right? I think I'm still on the recap from last week, right? Let me move forward, right? And then we talked about form on Saturday too. So the form element basically is a way for the browser to interact with what's the name, the user, in the sense that, oh, we'll need a certain level of information from the user to actually proceed. Like, I'm sure everybody's familiar with a kind of interface like this to sign in and sign out. These are like HTML forms, right? So that being said, let me don't dwell much on forms, because I think we didn't really talk much on CSS then, and that's where I want to do before today's class ends. All right. Okay, so a quick one before I move on for form. Your form has different forms of elements, right? Which includes a form that receives text, a form that receives email, a form that receives number, right? A form that should I say, a form for different purpose, right? The input, I mean. And then there's checkbox, there's radio, there's button, right? Now, what's the difference? If I say, oh, this input is a type of text, right? It's just receive regular text. If I say it's a type of number, if peradventure you want to use that form on your mobile phone, your keypad would appear as numbers, because that form is only accepting numbers and the likes of them. So this is just me still recapping last week, because like I said, from our stuff, week 1 and week 2 is CSS and HTML, right? So this is week 1, so we're still on week 2, right? And these are just the things we'll talk about, basically. So yes, I'm sure some people know all this already. I'm like, oh, please get to the interesting part, or get to the part I need to learn. We're going there. It's just going to be gradual. All right. So who remembers our block from the beginning? Right. So this block now, take a look at it, the before and the after. I know they are not similar blocks, but well, this is the level you can get to with CSS. Now, you've structured your web application with HTML. You have built it to a certain level, but it doesn't look beautiful. It doesn't look habitable. One thing you can do is, with CSS, you can actually make it more beautiful, styling with CSS. And that's why CSS brings about color, it brings about beautification on a particular website page. Now, CSS basically stands for cascading style sheets, right? CSS helps us control the layout of pages, right? Now, when I mean layout of pages, you can be given a sample page like this, right? And then you're supposed to position the section, the aside, the header, nav, right? CSS now gives you this power to actually create that positioning on a page. Now, this is very, very important as a developer, as a front-end developer, because if you don't have a good knowledge of CSS and HTML, and maybe you understand JavaScript, except maybe you want to really focus on backend, I don't think you can do much of the front-end development. Right. So that being said, CSS, let's just skip to the good part of the CSS, or the part. Now, how do we use CSS in an HTML document? Yeah, now I'm going to be doing a lot of practical here, right? CSS can be added to our HTML document in 3 ways. Now, in 3 ways. The first one is the inline way, right, by using style attributes. The second one is the internal, by using the style on the head, and the external. Now, enough of the story. Let's see that in action. So, yes, I'm going to start with like a paragraph. Let me just say a paragraph. Oh, what's going on? Okay. Alright, so I don't know why my okay, yes. So this is a paragraph. Now this is a sorry, let me zoom in. I think this is small. Yes, this is big enough now. This is a paragraph. Right. The first way we can use CSS in an HTML document is by using inline, and that's using style attributes. Now, this P now we can introduce a style attribute like this, and this style attribute we're going to use it to style this paragraph. By default, this paragraph is going to be black. If you notice, it's just black and plain there, but we want to make it red. So there's a property called color, and then you could add the value of the color to be red. Now if you take a look at it and you refresh your page, basically that paragraph is red already because CSS has been introduced into it, and this way of styling is called the inline styling, right? Another way we can do this is to introduce our style tag on the head. Now how does this work? You bring the style tag and then you target what you want to do using either the name of that element, right? So sorry please, if you're not comfortable with my pace, you could just shoot me a shot after the class, and like I said, I'll give you resources. This is me recapping. When I get to JavaScript, I'll try to be as basic as possible because JavaScript is where most of the issues lies, basically. So but for this, now let's just target it and say the color is red. Notice how I put a style tag and I say P. Now it's targeting this P in the body and it will give it a color of red. So if I go back to my browser, nothing changes, right? It's still red. I can even change the color to be blue. So if I refresh this page, the color is blue. Alright, so this style is called the internal style using the style tag. Now if you notice, I use the style tag inside our head tag, right? So that way this guy is targeted. We are styling this paragraph tag. Now the next one is using our external by using the a link tag, right? An external style sheet. Now this is where you're now concerning yourself with like creating a CSS file. So I can say create a new file and then I call it style.css, right? So by creating that file that way, I have a separate file, right, to work with and style this guy. Yes, I know Google is warning, the Meet is already warning us for timeout, but yes, so if that time is up, I'll just create a brief one so that we can quickly finish up the slide and then we'll meet the next class. I think that next class now we're starting JavaScript and I'm going to go as basic as possible. So I'm just trying to recap all this. Alright, so that way now, how do we style this paragraph? How do we style this particular paragraph using an external style sheet? This style sheet is style.css, and this we use a property called link. Now the good thing is once you just type the name, right, you can easily just select it and it will help you like position your stuff properly. So this link has an attribute of style sheet, and you have to like put a link to where that style sheet is located, right? So because they are on the same path, they are on the same folder, right? I can just write the name directly inside, right? So subsequently you will see how these things work. I know most of us knows this basic. So to first week and second week, recap class. So I have successfully linked this file to this CSS file basically. So I can now start writing, oh, what do I need? I need to target my property, right? P, and I need to give it a color of gold, right? So if I save it and I make sure this file too is saved, right, I can come and check it up and see that, oh, it actually works. So basically that's what this particular the three ways we can add CSS to our HTML property. All right, so yes, CSS selectors and properties. All right, now how do we now write CSS? Notice from this place there's a way I wrote my CSS. Now CSS is just basically saying that, oh, we're targeting this HTML document and we want to style properties or the elements in this HTML. So how do we do that? Right, there's what we call the selector. This selector now aims to target the element you use, and then with this selector you can give it like a property. So color blue. So for every H1 I want the color to be blue, I want the font size to be 12, right? So yes, I can target that, right? We also have class selector and what have you. Now the next slide we're going to talk about CSS combinator, and from our Saturday's class I gave an assignment. So how many of us went to research on CSS combinator? Please, if you were in the class on Saturday and you went to check about CSS combinator, please feel free to unmute yourself. I know some people that are in the class. I'll call your name, right, on Saturday. I know Akorede was in the class on Saturday. Who else was in the class? Samuel, you were in the class. So Akorede, were you able to check about CSS combinator? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so did you check about CSS combinator?
No.
Okay. Who else did their...
I didn't particular
Like, did you give that? I'm not very sure.
Okay, I think I did though. When we're talking about it, and then we gave a case study of how these have come up in... Well, we can still talk about it on the call here, right? But...
okay, I'm not sure.
But you understand what selectors are, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, cool. Now, I established one fact on Saturday. I said something about technical communication, right? Now, what stands you out as a developer? There's what we call technical communication. I don't know if anybody has encountered this situation where somebody will tell you something and it looks very strange, and then when they now show you the example of that thing, it's now be like, I know this thing, right? It's not this thing you were talking about, but the name looks very strange. I don't know if anybody has encountered that situation before. Please feel free to talk. I don't know, we were more interactive in the live class than this. Unmute your mic. Speak. Exactly. So yes, so when somebody say, okay, the CSS selector, the combinator and all, those are like basic things in CSS, but they are very important, because when you join a team and then maybe your teammate or your team lead or somebody's telling you something, oh, go to all the CSS selectors that are targeting the P elements or something. It's even easy as I'm saying it now, but they can tell you something and you be like, hey, come again please, like I don't understand, can you explain a bit, right? So while you are learning, I feel you should also take note of some of the names they use, right? So in that sense, selectors and combinators come together when you're talking about CSS. Now basically, CSS selector is like saying, okay, I want to like target all the paragraphs, all the H1s, what have you. Let me go to CSS selector on W3 schools. Now CSS selector basically is like saying you want to use CSS to find a particular element or a group of elements, right? So here now the target is for P, right? And they're saying, oh, the color of P should be red, align the paragraphs to the center. Now another CSS selector is the ID selector, basically. So now why this is special in the sense that give my let me say I have multiple paragraph 1 to, let me say, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4. Now and paragraph 0. Let me start with this. Now the issue with this thing is if my aim is to style just this first paragraph, which is paragraph 0, and I style it this way, right? Let me just say red so that it will be distinct. My selector now is targeting all the P's, right? And that being said, it will now be that all the paragraphs are red. If you look at it, paragraph 0, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, and 4, all of them are red. But now, how do I now target just this first paragraph? There are different ways, right? But for the purpose of CSS selector, there's a way called using an ID, right? So this ID, I can just say, okay, paragraph 0 instead. Now I have used this ID to identify this particular paragraph, which is P. Okay, so for this P now, what do I do? Oh, sorry, I don't need the hash here. Now I can just say, okay, P, paragraph 0. Now I come to CSS and I say, okay, I just want to target that first one. I can simply just change the selector and use the hash. Now this hash identifies the fact that, oh, this is an ID and I just need to target only the properties with this particular ID. So if I save it now, I have saved the page. Notice now, one thing with VS Code is once you are working on a page and you've not saved it, there are two indicators. It gives you this dot indicator here and here telling you that you've not saved the file. Now when you hit your save, right, this file gets saved. Now take a look at it. After reloading this page, only that first paragraph only that first paragraph is styled with the color of red because I have an ID of paragraph 0, right? So if I decide to add that ID here to, what does it do? Let's take a look at it. I put the same ID of paragraph 0. Does that also work on this? Yes, it does. So for every P element that has that ID, that CSS style is targeting each of them, right? So and then the last type of selector we have is the class selector, right? So the class selector is just the way you use your ID. You can change this to be a class, right? The attribute to be a class, and then this class basically is used to group elements. So now instead of using hash, now I change it to be dots. So that's just the difference, right? Like I said, this is a recap for everybody that cares to know or wants to know more, basically. So yes, that class that way. Now if you notice, this guy, the ID still remains paragraph, but this guy's changed to class. And what I'm doing here is I'm only targeting the ones with class, which is this dot, right? So if you hover over it, it will even try to tell you that the element with this class, that's the hint, right, is what is being targeted. So now let's go to our document and reload it. Now take note, this guy has a class of this guy has a class of the name of the class we put, and this guy has a ID of this. Now sometimes this could be like a very big headache because you are targeting something, it's not working. Now this is a very good place to introduce what we call the developer tool, which we'll be using very, very often as we go. Even in JavaScript too, we're going to be using the browser developer tool, which is this. Now take for instance, now I'm expecting this two guy to be red, but only this guy is red. How do I get to know? Now there's a way to open the developer tool. The shortest way is to right click there and go to inspect, right? And then that way we can actually tell, okay, this is carrying the class of para0, and this is ID, and this guy is only targeting the class of para0. So that's why this other guy is not working. So this is the first rule of the first approach to debugging your HTML class, right? Or your HTML and your CSS styling, basically. So this is what we call the developer tool. Anyway, I said that should be an avenue for me to introduce that into it. So now the main assignment, which is combinator, right? Yes, so for combinator, this combinator stuff is something some of us know, but the name might not be something too common for us. And then some other people know, right? So if you've ever taken like a test before on HTML and CSS, even some interviews too, there's an interview they gave questions on CSS combinator. Now, what is combinator? A combinator is something that explains the relationship between two selector, right? And then there are 4 basic combinator. Now this is it here. Please get this clearly. I want to find a better way to explain this, right? Notice from this diagram I added, there's the div with a space and a p. That's one form of combinator, a space. There's the div with the greater down and the p. This is another form of combinator, right? And then there's the div with p, with the p plus and the p, and then there's b with the tilde sign. They call the sign a tilde sign with the p. Now these 4 things, as much as they look alike, they have separate functionality, right? Now let's get to see this in action. How does this work, and why do we have this what's the name, selectors, basically these combinators rather? So I would do a structure div. Let me just type div, and then I would put a paragraph. Alright, so I just need something basic. Now this div, let me give it a paragraph of this is a sample paragraph. Now notice that this div is the container of this particular paragraph, right? This div is a container of paragraph. Quickly. Okay, thank you. Okay, so yes, I was going to talk about the CSS combinator now and just do a demo of the CSS combinator, and then we just have like 3 more slides and we're good to go. Right, so yes, here is the, pardon me please, this developer tool is going to be opened up, right, so that we can actually see what is going on behind the scene. Right, so let me just do a demo of, no, I wanted to close you, not open you. Okay, cancel. Okay, so let me do a demo of a brief CSS combinator, right? So this is a div with 2 paragraph. Sorry please, let me admit the people trying to join. How do I want to open up this call for everybody to join. This is where I did it the other time. Yes, open. Yeah, exactly. So alright, so let's just build a structure of an HTML. This is it, right? So I'm just in this div, I'm going to have like h1, this is a header tag, right? And then take note of the structure. This div now is the container of this h1 and this p tag, right? And then inside this div we have, let's just say, a link. This is a link. Now under this link we have another div, right, with another paragraph. Please pardon my what's name. I've said a lot of please on this call. It's just for me to explain what is going on. So my VS Code is filled with a lot of extensions, right, that you may not experience on your end. But per adventure you see something and you say, oh, I'm not experiencing the same thing on my end, you can call my attention or you can ask on the group chat. I will explain what is going on behind the scene, because sometimes I just write and it just suggests for me. I have what's the name of this stuff again? Copilots. So yes, so now this is another div. Now let's look at the structure of this particular div, right? Okay, so let me just say, after then I have a paragraph underneath it. This is an isolated paragraph. Now notice the structure of this particular div, right? This div is the container. Now that is to say, is the parent of all the nested elements inside. This is a header tag, this is a paragraph tag, this is a link, right? Now they are all directly inside this div. So these are the direct child or children of this div. Same goes as this div. So this div is a direct child of this div. Now for me to identify the div, I'll just give them a special ID, parents, and then for this particular guy I'll give it a special ID. Should I say child div? This one, parents div, so that we can identify it. Now notice, as I touch this div, it shows me the closing tag. The same way, if I touch this guy, it highlights the closing tag. Now this particular div, this is the child div, but this p inside this div now is the grandchild of, or should I say descendant now of this div, right? So it's not the direct child, right? So I can just give it a special ID of a descendant. Why I'm labeling it is I want us to get the gist, right? So from here we have the parent, we have all the child. Let me say child. I'll copy this ID and put it on all the child. So child, this is also a child, right? So There's child 1, child 2, child 3, and another child. Now this is a descendant, right? Now this guy now is not in the family of this div. This is an isolated paragraph, right? Like I said, there's no one size fit all when you're writing your HTML. You just have to know what are the best practices. All right, now let's do combinator in action. Now notice I have linked this page to this CSS, so I can go there. Let me clear this guy. All right, so let's start with the first should I say the first combinator, which is div and space p. Now what does that mean? I can just say, okay, div, right? Before even div self, I say, okay, my div should have a background color of yellow. Background color of yellow. Now let's look at how this works. Okay, so what is the expected outcome, right? So for this particular guy, you see that this div has a background color. The parent div has a background color of yellow. The child div also has a background color of yellow, but because it's yellow, you can't really see it. Now let me give this child div another background color, right, so that we can see the difference. Now because this guy is an ID, I'm going to use the ID to target that div instead of div, right? So I can say how do we use ID? Hash, and then I can say the background color is red. Background color is red. So this particular div has a background color of yellow. This div has a background color of red. If you notice, but they are nexted. So this div is still inside this div, right? Now let's take a look at it again. Starting with the combinator, let me comment this guy out so that it doesn't affect. Right. So from this first, what we have on our slide here, the first one, right? There's a space and there's a P. How does that work? Now, if I give a space and P, do you know what will happen? Now, let's go back to the structure again. This is a div. How many P's do we have inside this div? Please, somebody should unmute your mic and talk. How many P's do we have under this div? Different people can talk. Hello? Can anyone hear me? Please don't type, talk. Okay. I think there's a message. Samuel said 2. Alright. I don't know if anybody has a counter opinion. Notice that this P is inside this div. Right? Is a direct child. This guy is a descendant. If anybody has a counter opinion, please, you can let me know. Alright, yes. So inside this div, generally there are 2 P's, 2 P tags. This P tag and this P tag. There are 2 separate P tags, but all of them are still inside it, regardless of whether they are a child or a descendant. Now, this is what this stuff is trying to do. We're trying to target all the P inside this div, and that is why what this combinator is doing, right? They call it, this principle is a combinator, so it's a direct child combinator from our slide. If you notice, I say it's a descendant combinator rather, right? So you take all the P's and give them yellow paragraph. So if you look at it now, this particular P and this P would have what? A yellow paragraph, a yellow background. So let's just take a look at it on the stuff. Now, if you notice, this is it, right? It has a yellow background. This has a yellow background. We can also inspect that. See, that's one good thing about this developer tool. Let me zoom in a bit so that we can see it. So if you notice, this is the parent, right? You can trace it down to the child, and then this is the descendant. If you notice, it's like a tree-like structure. Now this is a separate P. So for this P now, and this P will be targeted, which is what that is. If you notice, div.p and div.p. Now going forward, you would see that there's another relationship, which is what the child selector. If I go back to my style sheet now and I introduce this guy, this greater than sign, right? Now what this is trying to do is it's only trying to target the direct child, and it does not have business with the descendants of that HTML structure. Now take a look at it here. How many direct child do we have? We just have one direct child of this div. This P now is a descendant of this div, is not a direct child of this div, basically. So what we're trying to target now is just a direct child. And how many direct child do we have? One. Right. So if you go back to that particular guy, and we reload. Okay, so is there another direct child? Nope. So, but there's an issue somewhere. This is a descendant, this is a direct child. The CSS is supposed to target just the direct child, but it's still showing. Right, so let me see. This is interesting. Okay, I'm coming. I just want to do a little bit of debugging. What is going on here? Right. Alright, so yes, there's a direct child. Let's go to the combinator here. Welcome to programming, where you do something and you think you do something and it's not working. This is a child selector. That's a descendant selector. Now on their end, when they tried it, let's just go to try it yourself here. You would see that paragraph 4 is in the div, 3 is another child. Okay, so here's the gist. Please do understand what is going on. Please unmute yourself and speak. Who gets what is going on? Or you've not been following? Please, I think I like this kind of movement where we can get to interact. Let me go back to the call so that I can see everybody on the call. Hello? Can anyone hear me? Looks like I'm the only one still on the call.
Hi.
You can hear me, right? So, do you understand that there's a problem? Do you understand what the problem is?
No.
Okay, so let me go back to the code again and explain what the problem is. Right. So we're looking at CSS combinator, right? And this combinator we're trying to use is we're trying to style only the direct child of the div. And that is to say, from this div, what we're trying to style is only this P, which is the direct child of this div. Do you get now?
Okay.
But
yes.
With that style is affecting this P too. And that is where the problem is. Now, that is to say, yes, exactly. So this is a sample paragraph. It's the only one supposed to be styled, and not this is another paragraph. But this is a sample paragraph. Is the only one. This one is showing yellow. This one is also showing yellow.
Okay.
And that is a problem because this is supposed to just target only the direct child of the P. Right? So do you understand the problem now? Hello? Does anyone understand the problem now? Please, people should not make it look like I've been talking to myself all along, right? I just need to understand that everybody's following.
I understand now. Understand now.
You understand the
I
problem?
understand.
Who else understands the
Understand now.
problem?
So how do we style only? So how do we style only? How do we style only the child now?
Yes,
How do we
so
style only the
that
child?
is where we missed it, right? Now, this is where the issue is. Notice that we said div. We didn't specify which of the div. And we said the direct child of a div. Now, the issue is that this div has a direct child of P. This is also a div that has a direct child of P. Do you understand? So that CSS is saying anywhere you see div, give the direct child a background color of yellow. Anywhere you see div, give the direct child a background color of yellow. Right? And that is why we need to change this guy from a div. Right? If not, we'll keep seeing the same result. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Wait. So
Yes.
the closing and the opening tag, I changed this guy from a div now. Because that way we're targeting only the background color of that div. So of this direct child, which is this P tag. Let me give it space so that we'll see what I'm doing. So this P tag is a direct child of this div, right? So, but we also had a div that has another direct child, and that's why that guy was affecting. So if I save this page now and I go back to the web page that is loading, right, we see that only that first paragraph has a background color of yellow. I don't know. I don't think. Please, am I making sense, or should I look for a better way to explain this? Samuel, are you on the call? Ayomide, are you on the call? Leia, are you on the call?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Do you understand whatever I'm saying so far?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
You also understand Ayomide?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
How about you, Leia?
Yes, sir.
Hello. All right. So for the sake of our time, I'll just continue. Okay. So I'll continue for the sake of our time. Now, there's what we call adjacent siblings, right? And there's what we call
Following.
general. Hello.
Following.
Someone said something. Okay, so let me just continue. There's what we call adjacent sibling, and there's what we call general sibling, right? These are all CSS combinators, basically. Now, if you notice now, this P is an adjacent sibling of this div. This P is an adjacent sibling of this div. It's just a sibling. It's not a child. It's not nested inside the div, right? So to target this P, what we will have to do is put the plus. This plus simply means adjacent. So if you notice, is putting the P side by side with the div, right? And from this structure, the only thing that will have a yellow color is this particular P. Right? So using this adjacent sibling, now let's check it out. It's only that P that has a yellow color. Alright, so okay, so finally for this class we're looking at the general sibling, right? So what does the general sibling actually have to say, basically? So let's just look at the general sibling. The general sibling is a selector element that are next sibling of a particular element. Now the following example selects all the P elements that are next siblings of the particular element. What does that even mean? Right, so I'm trying to try it out and see what they are saying. Right now, look at this structure, the general sibling. Right, we have a first P, we have another P. Do you get? We have a third P. We have code, and we have a fourth P. Okay, so let me copy this thing, right, and just bring it to whatever we have here, so that it will be bold enough, and then we can dissect the structure. HTML, whatever HTML is all about structure, right? Like I established. Now this is H2 tag. This is a first P tag. This is a second P tag. This is another P tag, but it's inside a div. This is a third, another P tag, and this is another P tag. Now notice this div has a sibling, has another sibling, like this H1, HP, they are on the same level with this particular div, right? Even this P tag and this code and all they are on the same level with this div. The only thing not on the same level with this div is this paragraph tag that is nested inside this div. Does that make any sense? Can I continue? Hello? Is anyone following?
That's the descendant. That piece of descendant.
Yes, it's nested inside this div. It's a child of this div, right?
Descendant.
Well, it's a descendant, but it's also a direct child. Do you get? So I'm trying to show, like,
Yes.
take for instance now, okay, with this P plus tag now, this guy is going to affect all the direct siblings that are P of this div, and that is to say all the P outside this div would have a yellow background. Now let's take a look at it here. So if you notice, this is the page, right? This is all this P. Let me see. I'm coming, please. So if you take a look at it here, this P is just the adjacent sibling of this div, like I explained, right? So this is the closest sibling of, we're looking at it downward now, this is the closest sibling of this P. So when you use this particular selector, it looks for just the closest sibling and it tries to style it with a background color of yellow. Now if I now change this symbol to this, right, it looks for all the siblings, not just the direct sibling, right? So all the siblings after that div will be styled. So this P is is on the same level, but going downward. I'm trying to make this thing make sense, right? But yes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send a resource on this CSS combinator after this class, right? So that we can get to understand it very well, because this knowledge will help you a lot when you are working with HTML and CSS. But just so you know, there are 4. The first 2 is quite simple to get, right? There's the direct child, there's the descendant, now there's the adjacent sibling, and there's all the general siblings, but downward, right? So yes, because of our time is fast spent, and I don't want to go much further than this. I'm going to share this slide with us. The next thing you should check about, which was the last thing I talked about in the last class, is the box model. Right, and there's a reason I was talking about this. And then the next one is CSS layout, and then responsive web design. Right now, it's unfortunate we will not be meeting this weekend because we only meet physically bi-weekly. That's every 2 weeks, right? But every Thursday we're going to meeting on this call, and based on our curriculum here, this first 2 weeks was to just recap, not really much on CSS and HTML. But what I'm trying to achieve is I'm trying to bring us to a knowledge level where we'll be comfortable writing basic HTML and CSS, such that when we start JavaScript, it will not be much of a should I say something that is not we don't really understand, right? Now, what I want to do is after this class, if you still feel I don't still understand properly, right? Feel free, you can go back to the video or check the slide and go to the resources, right? Please try as much as possible to do it before your next class. You can even talk about it on the group and I will also answer. So I'm just going to share it. So for the remaining 3 topics, which is the box model, CSS layouts, and responsive web design, right? Those are going to be our assignments for the next class. We're going to be the next time now. We're just going to be talking about. I'm going to also write it on the group. The box model, right? I'll just randomly call. We'll just discuss about it. I'll not do much teaching about it. CSS layout and then responsive web design. Now, what is the aim of this thing? It's just to keep us accountable, right? I'm not here to teach like scratch ABC of HTML, CSS, right? I'm only just going to keep us on our feet to keep learning and then put us on the right track on learning the whole learning journey. That being said, I think we have come to the end of the class, right? If you notice, I added some of the useful resource, right, of this particular class to this slide. Thank you so much for joining the call. I don't know if anybody has any question that I can address before we leave the call. I know our time is fast spent. Does anybody has any question? Anyway, if you don't have a question now, or maybe you are shy to speak in the call public, you can generally ask your question on the group, and that will work well for everybody, right? You could either reach out to me personally or we'll talk about it in the group. Thank you so much for joining the call. See you our next class, which is next week Thursday. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, you too.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, you too.
Bye. Bye.